Hello, another Pursuing God's Heart in 2 Timothy. We come into 2 Timothy chapter 3, and Paul is passing on his encouragement to Timothy. He's sharing from the heart what Timothy needs to hear and know for the difficult times that he was going to face. Now here we are 20 centuries later, and we're facing difficult times too. In fact, Paul here refers to the last days. At the start of chapter 3, he says, look, Timothy, understand this. In the last days will come times of difficulty. After Jesus came first time and returned to heaven, in a sense, he kicked off the last days. That was the beginning of the end. That, from Paul's perspective, they were right there in the midst of it. He didn't know, probably, that there were 20 centuries of last days still to come. But if it was true then, how much is it true now? Difficult days for the gospel. Difficult days for the gospel indeed. But verse 2, he gives a description. In fact, for 3-4 verses, he gives this long list of the problems in the world. For people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness but denying its power. Avoid such people. And specifically, he's going on to talk about in this section not kind of the crazy violent stuff that you might see on television, sort of rioting or something like that. He's really talking about people who kind of look Christian, people who are dressed up in Christian garb and yet worm their way into houses and take advantage of people who are vulnerable. That's really where he's going in this section. But just the description of the culture is quite enlightening, isn't it? And with a list that long, it's potentially confusing, but just notice the repetition. Just one thing. There's other things we could notice, but notice it begins, it middles, and it ends with a reference to love. The heart of the human problem is the human heart. And look what it says here. Instead of what we should be, people will be lovers of self, lovers of money. Further down, he says, not loving good. And then at the end of it, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. What this world needs is a whole load of people loving God. Was it Augustine that said, love God and do as you please? I don't know. I usually quote things like that and call it Spurgeon, but I'm pretty sure that was a bit earlier than Spurgeon. But love God and do as you please. Some people don't like that. But the reality is, if you really love God, then what you please will be really pleasing to him. And imagine what the world would be like, filled with people who really love God rather than pleasure, who really love good, who really love others, who really don't love money so that it corrupts them, but instead are willing to give of themselves just like God gave of himself for us. Lovers of God. That's what the world needs. And we can't force anybody, but we can take a look at ourselves, can't we? We can say, okay, Lord, is my love grown cold? Am I part of the problem? Please warm my heart. Please draw me back to you. Ignite my heart by your Spirit with a love for Jesus, a love for God, a love for that which is good. Because what this world needs right now, as it has always done, is people who are lovers of God and lovers, therefore, of good. Lovers not of self, but lovers of others, who will give of self, just like our God gave of his self for us. Gave himself for us too, actually. That's another way of saying exactly the same thing, isn't it? What a wonderful God we have. What a messy world we're in. But what hope we can have knowing who God is and what God is like.